1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Hey, Neil. How are you?
I am well, Brad. How are you?
Good, good.
I have seen the PowerPoint now 3 times, and I still think it's a good PowerPoint.
Which one?
The one you gave the Planning Commission.
Yeah, Jody's great at helping refine it. So we've narrowed it down, quick, succinct, don't talk on the slides, that kind of stuff. So it's good.
Keeping you in your lane.
Yeah, as you know me, I could probably go on and on about topics, and it's like trying to leave behind those little nuggets. So.
Well, that's great. I think it's great that it's getting out there.
Yeah.
As a discussion idea.
Yeah. Here, I'll put my background on. Oh, it's backwards. Oh well. Remember that one?
It's not backwards on our end.
No, it's not. Remember that? I forget what meeting that was that you invited me to. Get the strap.
That was hilarious.
I told Jody. It's like, yeah. Yeah, you have to get the right pieces in play, kind of wrap it up, because it's just such a new thing that the on-demand stuff is just having the right staff and resources. So.
We've got about 5 minutes.
Yep. Early is on time is late.
My son's football coach drilled that into him, and it was a good thing because he didn't listen. Boy, didn't listen to it when I was drilling it into him.
I say it, but I can't really say that I follow it that often because, outside forces keep me from always being on time.
Yeah, no, it's fair to say there are outside forces.
Like the bus being late.
Got about 4 minutes till we get started, guys.
I'm going to stop my video for a little while.
Welcome, Garland and Jody. We've got about 2 minutes till we get started. And Mr. Tubbs is joining the meeting.
Mr. Williamson, how are you, sir?
I am well, Garland. How are you?
I'm doing well. Brad, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Garland. And you?
Doing good.
You know, I think this is reversed. I usually have that tie on, and now you do. Thanks for. I'm gonna block my video real quick because after Jim Foley at the Albemarle Public Schools, the bus has shamed me for doing an interview without a tie. I now have one here in my office, so I might go put that on just to.
Well, you know, I thought you were gonna have a tie on, so.
Yeah.
You normally have a tie on even
I do. I really thought about it hard this morning. I'm like, should I? It seems stuffy. I don't know. So.
I had a white shirt on, so I couldn't, play as dapper as you are right now.
I'm going to wait just 1 more minute to let folks be having difficulty connecting, but we'll get started in about 1 minute. If everyone could mute your mics unless you're speaking, that would be grand. All right. We've got all of our presenters here, and I will continue to be allowing folks into this. Welcome to, on behalf of the Public Affairs Group Chair, Emily Dooley, welcome to the first ever Zoom Public Affairs Property Rights Luncheon. I hope you brought your own lunch. Our goal with this, the Public Affairs Group of CAAR is charged with this particular luncheon to bring out ideas of things that are critically important to the community. And this year, the discussion really is centered around how transit and parking interact with the real estate world and what's going on in those particular industry sectors. So we're lucky to have 4 folks with us today to talk about that and to talk about specifically where Charlottesville is. I'm happy that we were able to reschedule this and allow because of a conflicting date. But the goal of this is really to bring forward questions. I'm going to do a brief introduction, then the speakers are going to have a brief introduction of their own. Then I have some set questions, one for each speaker, and then the other speakers will have the opportunity to chime in on those questions if they wish. But I've left time at the end of this meeting for us to have questions from the entire gathered group. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce probably the person on this panel that I've known the longest. Sean Tubbs and I have served, I think we're going on hundreds and hundreds of hours of public meetings where there are lots of seats available. And these meetings include everything from policy board meetings from the Metropolitan Planning Organization, where I often see the other gentlemen on this panel, but also city council meetings, planning commissions, and board of supervisors. Sean is an award-winning writer and audio producer. I actually first got to know him, I think in 2002 or 2003 with the Siebert Podcasting Network, which was an incarnation prior to his work with Charlottesville Tomorrow, and most recently, a new news platform. In addition to his journalistic credibility, and he has some real cred, Sean has been a tireless transit advocate, shaming me every time he got up and said I rode the bus to this meeting. So without further ado, Mr. Sean Tubbs.
Great. Yes, everybody. So just real quick, this is the quick introduction. Is this the full 5 minutes? And you're muted, Neil.
Okay. It's the full 5-minute introduction, Sean. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Great. Yeah, because the first thing about buses is that they need to operate on a timeline if you're going to catch them, and Neil had said 12:10, so I was just making sure. But yes, hello everybody. It's good to be here to rib Neil a little bit, to talk a little bit about transit. Again, as Neil said, I am a transit advocate. At the same time, I'm no longer an advocate. I was working for an environmental organization. Now I'm back into journalism, producing a daily newscast and newsletter, which you can subscribe to for free. I tried to arrange my thing because if you can see up here, this is actually a clip from a Virginia Tech newspaper I was on. It's an article from 1993 where I was writing about bus service. Buses are, I'm first generation American. My parents are from England originally. I've often been really interested in how dense communities can be supported by transit so that you don't need to have a car. As Neil said, I almost made it a year taking the bus as my primary form of transit. I live in the city of Charlottesville, about a mile away from where my workplace was. I could walk it in 40 minutes, but I managed to get that time down. I managed to get the bus time to get to that location in under 20 minutes. That's from leaving my house to get there. Now that took a lot of work. It took a lot of work of learning a system. I'm going to talk, I think, and obviously with the pandemic has changed everything a little bit. I no longer have that workplace. I no longer have a need to go downtown unless it's for a casual trip. So I mostly drive. However, having said all of that, this is a difficult time for transit, and I'm sure you're going to hear that from our other panelists today. There's a lot of change, but I think that I would encourage everybody to think about this community's future. A growing transportation infrastructure, physical transportation infrastructure is very difficult to fund and to coordinate. And I think that's a lot of those meetings that Neil and I participate in. That's a lot of what gets said. So transit is, in a lot of ways, is a more cost-effective way of getting people around. The University of Virginia knows this. They have something called a transportation demand management plan, which is all about trying to shift people from needing a parking space to having some alternative way to get to their destination. This is a plan that is really exciting if you're someone like me, but also if you're somebody like some of the other people you'll speak with, because the cost of parking is extremely expensive, $25,000, $30,000. I don't even know what the latest conversation is. In the city of Charlottesville, parking is also becoming a hot topic. If any of you have been following the controversy over the new parking garage that's planned, you'll see that there is a lot of angry people, let's just say, I can say that, who are not happy about this new parking garage that's coming. So it's an issue, but yet I will say this from a perspective of somebody who did take a year and I haven't been on a bus since March 11th, the day before before the emergency was declared. But yet I've been following Brad, who you'll hear from in a minute, talk about other ways we might be able to think about how transit might work in the future. Because as we imagine a more dense Charlottesville, or even if we think about the outlying counties and growth that's happening in Greene, Fluvanna, over the valley, there's a lot of activity coming. And it's my hope now as a reporter, not as an advocate, is to make sure that we're catching up and getting people up to speed with what's happening. But obviously there really is that thing. I will say that in that year of trying to get people to ride the bus, I'm not sure how successful I was, but I do believe that for me personally, it was a much healthier way to get around the community. I didn't have to pay for parking. And so for me, somebody like me who chooses to live and has the means to live closer in, I do believe that our community needs a robust transit system, but the obstacles faced by transit are very real, as you're going to hear. But there's still a bright future. But I'm not allowed to spin anymore, so I'll just be quiet now. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. I have to say, one of the people that was helping to extend some of those meetings is on our panel today, former Albemarle supervisor, Brad Sheffield, who perhaps most famously in his tenure as a supervisor provided a stuffed groundhog to former supervisor Ken Boyd because he kept saying it was Groundhog Day. I still think that was perhaps one of the funnest moments in local government. Brad is the CEO of what's known as Jefferson Area United Transit, although you won't find that really yet. It's buried on their website. They're known as JAUNT. And JAUNT is moving in a lot of new directions. Brad is be talking about some of these, but on-demand scheduling, as well as employer-sponsored transit, autonomous vehicles, and much more. In my time, whatever it's been, 16 years, Brad and I have great conversations, and he's smarter than I am, and I'm not ashamed to say he and I don't always agree. But with that being said, Mr. Sheffield, the floor is all yours.
Thanks. And just to clarify, just more of an introduction, not really addressing the question, right? The questions you gave.
Right.
So just one correction, Neil, is actually we don't go by the Jefferson Area United Transportation anymore. Never, ever since 1984, actually, when JAUNT became a corporation, actually under the Public Service Corporation Virginia Code, the name JAUNT, the acronym, became the company's name. And it is interesting that you bring that up, because it is this narrative of JAUNT that is evolving and expanding over the recent years that has really added to some of the excitement here, that we're able to kind of utilize our structure of who we are and what we do to kind of continue to evolve to serve the community. And so in the years that I've been in this role, that's what I've really been working on is looking at what we need to see into the future, and then what to kind of bring to this community, and specifically around what JAUNT is about. And we are really about focusing on the customers, focusing on those customized or specialized type services versus more of the volume type operations. One of the biggest things, and you'll hear me maybe repeat it a little bit later, is that we're highly unique, not just in the structure, but in the level and scope of services that we provide, the level of coordination that we operate, the approach to maximizing the vehicles. JAUNT was built on this concept of just coordinating all the different types of transportation needs that go beyond that type of fixed route mass transit. And it's been successful, while other communities, it's kind of fizzled away. So I get a lot of questions about the comparisons of JAUNT to other areas, and it's a struggle. We do like to think of ourselves as being unique, but we do also tend to stand out from any of our peers that we end up coming across.
I appreciate the clarification. 1984 was a long time. I'll catch up sooner or later. Our next panelist, Rick Siebert, has been with Charlottesville and as a parking manager for, I guess it's almost 4 years now, Rick. And he is specifically responsible for 2 public parking garages, 2 surface lots. We had an experiment with some meters, and that was under his tenure. And in a nod to the import of parking to economic vitality, Rick doesn't report to Public Works, but he actually reports to the city's Economic Development Department. So it's an interesting way of looking that parking is a critical part of economic development, and how parking relates to transit is equally important. Rick and I have had several conversations about the new world, whereby autonomous vehicles we no longer have park and ride lots, we have ride and park lots, because your car can go park itself, and by the way, it parks better than you do, and we can utilize space that's elsewhere. But with that being said, I'll turn it over to Rick. I need you to unmute, Rick.
I'd like to take a little hitchhike off what Sean was talking about, but to talk a little more broadly. I am certainly an advocate for transit. We need to do everything we can to limit the need for public parking. Parking costs too much. It's an enormous waste of space in urban areas. So we need to do everything we can to get people out of single occupancy vehicle trips and reduce the demand for parking. But coming here to Charlottesville was a little bit of a return for me. The last time I'd spent any time here was in about 1970. I was a cadet at VMI down in Lexington, and I had a girlfriend who lived in Charlottesville, on Chancellor Street. But we used to just hang out in front of the lawn. We used to sit on the wall out there. We used to get really drink 3-2 beer and get really weak, crummy pot from other students. And it was a wonderful, quiet little town with little traffic and a lot of low-rise buildings. Well, the problem is Charlottesville didn't stay like that. Everything west of 29 used to be nothing but trees and farmland. It's not that way anymore. But there's a lot of people in Charlottesville that don't seem to want to acknowledge that UVA now has 20,000 undergraduate students, that we now have S&P Global located next door to the downtown mall in the original GSA building, and the three-letter federal community has moved up to a new facility out on 29. There's been enormous growth in jobs, and people seem very happy with that's done to the city in terms of its tax base, in terms of getting more well-educated folks with good jobs here into town. But the city doesn't seem to have changed its urban model at all. There seems to be a large constituency of people that believe that everybody can still live in single-family homes, and we can build office buildings in the more urbanized corridors of the city, and everything's just going to work fine that way. Well, the problem with that is when everybody gets in their car to have to go to work, because if you live on a cul-de-sac in a single-family home, getting effective mass transit is very difficult, then you can't get down the street. And that's before you've got to find a place to park. So I'm simply trying to advocate for the fact that we've got the form-based code that's being kicked around town. We've got a comprehensive plan. I really believe that Charlottesville needs to own up to the fact that it's not a little college town anymore. Instead, we need to talk about building office buildings in urbanized areas and then putting residential development next to those buildings so that people can walk to work instead of living out in the county or in Louisa and driving to work every day, because that's just not a sustainable way for Charlottesville to continue to grow. It's either that or Charlottesville can decide it's not going to grow. We don't want any more employers. We don't want any more people. We want to get smaller. I don't think anybody's advocating for that, but I'm just saying that I don't see how you can both advocate for growth and at the same time suggest you're going to stay a single-family suburban model town. So that's my soapbox.
And it's somewhat refreshing to hear the director, parking manager, wanting to have less cars. It's a interesting prescription, and that's kind of why we wanted to put this group together. Our last panelist is an employee of the world-class city. Garland Williams has been director of Charlottesville Area Transit for just over a year. And what a year it's been. He came to Charlottesville after a long tenure with the Greater Richmond Transit Systems. So Garland, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. So I want to say congratulations to Charlottesville Area Transit, which is 45 years old this year. It actually started in 1975 as the Charlottesville Transit System as a part of a division of Public Works. And it's kind of morphed and started transportation in Albemarle County in 1978. And we've been running continuously since then. Even during the COVID period of time, Charlottesville Area Transit, CAAR now, has continued its service. So where is transit heading? And I want to say to the group that's assembled here, it's great to hear folks advocate for transit. We're all in that group of wanting to provide world-class services around mass transit to this region. Charlottesville Area Transit is retooling itself so we can actually provide better transit service to this region. One of my goals when I first got here is to look at the system, and being here every year, I've seen that we need to improve our technology. Technology is a major part of transportation. We need to improve our fleet. Our fleet is a little old and dated, and there are alternative fuel vehicles that are out different. We can also help with the parking issues if we provide higher level of service of frequency on our major corridors, look at potentially advocating for park and ride lots, strategic shuttle service that goes back and forth between downtown and the satellite parking areas. Transportation is key to developing a world-class city, which we are. We want to continue to be. So I am advocating for more service, more bi-directional service. One of the things I noticed when I got here is we have a number of, which is really operationally, it works well, but it also, I want to go south, but you got to take me north to go south. So we're looking at how to restructure the whole system to make it more user-friendly. You shouldn't have to have a public timetable to figure out how to use the system. If the route runs every 15 minutes, by clockwork it'll work every 15 minutes from say 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night. It makes it really easy for folks to figure out how to use your system. And kind of with that, I'll just say I'm really eager to, COVID's kind of stopped that, but really eager to get out to the public and figure out what it is that they want this system to look like, not just now, but 5 to 10 years from now. And then we need to get to work.
Well, I will say that having been in the Northern Virginia market when the Metro Rail opened, it was two things that I thought that made Metro really work. Number one was the timing of how quickly buses, you didn't need to have the schedule to get a bus or a train. If you got there and the train wasn't there, it would be soon. But the other thing that made it work was all of the government employees that were getting paid parking all of a sudden got Metro fare cards. They no longer had paid parking as a part of their compensation. And so that created an impetus for that system that I saw really robust, especially the corral at the Pentagon of Metro buses, even before the rail opened up. But it is, I'm appreciative of all you're trying to do, and I think COVID has given us a little bit of a hiccup in some of those actions. The first programmatic question I have is for Brad, and it really talks about this a proposed on-demand transit model. How does that differ than what your current service is? And if you could talk a little bit about the Crozet autonomous shuttle, the ambassadors instead of drivers on these vehicles, how long did it go? How many people did you hit? All that kind of stuff.
I'll start with your second question first. Well, that project was actually pretty interesting in the sense that for JAUNT, it was a partnership with a local company in the county to help build up the knowledge base of that company to take their product further into some other markets. And even most recently, the platform that they use to operate that is being launched under another initiative in Fort Carson under this US Ignite concept. The Army base there in Colorado Springs, Perrone Robotics is working with them to implement the exact same technology and vehicle to be moving people around. So the main goal of that effort was to build up a local business to help perpetuate what they're able to offer, and it worked. On the other side, we put the services out. I think it really showed us how there's a lot of questions out there from the community about autonomous technology, not just about the concerns about it, but just how it does fit into our infrastructure. Autonomous technology is really into different silos, and the main two are either your vehicle is autonomous or your infrastructure is autonomous. And I think we really start teasing out how the difference of the two could play out. The last thing I'll leave you with on that is for transit, it's quite interesting to think that almost everybody probably on this call has a car that has maybe automatic braking or blind sight assistance or something. Most transit vehicles have none of that. And yet we're talking about autonomous type vehicles. So we would go from essentially what feels like a horse and carriage buggy to an autonomous vehicle in the transit world. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for us to garner some of the technology from autonomous activities to really work on the safety of transit activities before we jump into driverless transit services. At least that's my opinion from that project, which again had its success. So on the top of on-demand, I get the question actually a lot about how it is different from what we do at JAUNT. The answer is it's actually not that different. Goes back to the early statement about JAUNT being very different from many other of its peers in the level of services and the scope that we provide. That really does provide us the foundation to just use this as an evolution of what we are able to provide, staying focused on the customer, being responsive, and being able to shape our services around those needs. What it does is it enhances more of what we could do because of the ability to respond to the partnership needs or the community needs is greatly enhanced. So that's probably the biggest difference, is the amount of data that would be coming in, as well as the ability to redeploy services in response to that data almost immediately versus any lengthy planning or bureaucratic process that would have to go into play. On-demand itself is part of a little bit bigger picture of mobility. And the US does struggle with this quite a bit. I think it falls into this concept of specialized services versus volume services, and the two rarely mix well together. Just totally different business approaches to those things. And we're finding where we're trying to kind of catch up with companies like Uber and other ride sharing type platforms, and we're trying to specialize what we do, and we kind of stumble through that. But again, JAUNT, we've always been doing that, and so we're not really stumbling. But it kind of fits into the thought of what all the mobilities together would look like. And in Europe and other places, they call the concept more or less mobility as a service. The Federal Transit Administration is calling it these days a complete trip. They tend to come up with different names every few years just because they're trying to see what sticks to the wall. But the concept itself is all about how can you bring all the different modes together. And this really comes from seeing so many different things like scooters and e-bikes and all this other different types of mobilities that are out there that people are choosing. Bring it all together in one platform, and you combine and coordinate somebody's trip, and you give them multiple options and let them choose, and go from there. I can see where this would include things like parking. If you're going from your house to downtown and you see that there's limited level of parking and transit there just as quickly, and it's factoring in all the other different steps of your trip, the users start to understand the options that are weighed against the conditions that exist at that time. And I think that's where we're going to see more and more power come out of these type of approaches. But on-demand is just the first step of that. And I believe that it's going to build on the whole concept of innovation, in that these type of ideas have always existed. The desire to have them has been there. Just that facilitation, and in recent years, technology facilitates quite a bit. And then you couple that with a willingness of the community to kind of tackle this stuff. And I think we've got the right mix of innovation, and we'll see it moving forward. But our focus is going to be on what partnerships we can build, because when you talk about layering many partnerships on top of each other, the users they don't have to understand what partnerships exist. They just need to know where they're going from and where they're going to, and those different layers start to kick in and really show them what options they have. So that's kind of it in summary, but it is a pretty powerful approach to opening up a wide range of opportunities that we haven't even thought of yet.
Following up on that, Brad, and the complete trip, there was a comment on Twitter during your a presentation at the Planning Commission yesterday, Tuesday, asking, and this will be for Garland as well, how, I believe it was Rick Randolph brought up the e-bikes idea, and you mentioned it as well. The question was, how many of these e-bike carrying are you seeing that as a growing sector, or is it still standard bikes, or is it a mix? I'm just curious.
I think you're seeing the world of quote unquote mobility really trying to find what it could provide residents as options. And when you bring in a business model that more corporate kind of thought pattern of, you know, testing products and seeing what gets traction, I think we're going to continue to see those things evolve. And especially when you talk about the life cycle of the assets and such, that's really what's going to tell us what's going to work and what's not. But we're seeing more and more of them. Yeah, the scooter thing just entertains me quite a bit, because if you look over in Europe, they don't have electric scooters, because people, you know, they have those fold down scooters that I bought my kid when, you know, she was 6 years old. They put them in their backpack, and that's what they ride to the transit stop, and then they ride transit, and then they take that little scooter to the rest of the way to work. They don't have electric ones because there isn't a market for it. But I think that's where we're going to see, you know, who knows what else is going to start cropping up here and there when it comes to those kind of mobility ideas. But I think looking beyond just an e-bike, you have to know that people are going to get creative in mobility modes, and we just have to know how we can provide those choices in a more seamless way, so, you know, people aren't just focused on just e-bike and that's it and that's all they ever use.
Garland?
I'd like to jump in and add a couple of things there. So like you told the panel here, that I actually come from Richmond. So I was the planning director, the director of planning, scheduling, and government relations for the Greater Richmond Transit Company, GRTC transit system. And the BRT project that was kind of our marquee 30-year big grandiose project that was really successfully implemented has e-bikes as at all of the permanent stations for the BRT. So that was a way of incorporating e-bikes as that first mile, last mile component. That is kind of the challenge for everyone. So I think as the systems grow, there will be a position for e-bikes to potentially position themselves to handle that harder first mile, last mile component that we always, as transit, struggles with. So I do think Charlottesville, as our systems combine, CAT, JAUNT, get bigger, there will be a segment by which we won't be able to, as we get larger, we won't be able to go in every nook and cranny. E-bikes will be able to potentially facilitate movement from your neighborhood, from your home to a station or a bus stop, and then allow you to get JAUNT or CAT.
Well, and to be clear, one of the challenges in doing this job for as long as I have is that I start using terms that aren't readily available. E-bikes are bikes that are have an electric assistance to help you up the hills, etc. The other thing is Garland mentioned BRT, which is bus rapid transit, and I'm always guilty of, especially when I talk to Sean, of throwing around acronyms that he and I know, and everybody else around is laughing because they have no idea what we mean by a TJPDC, which is the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission. So anyway, onward and upward. Our next programmatic question is headed to Rick Siebert. First is easy. Where are we on this new parking garage? What additional council action is required? And as we kind of referenced about autonomous vehicles, and how could you design the building, which will have probably a 50-year lifespan at least, in a manner that it could be adaptively reused if we come to that future where we have vehicles that will park themselves, you know, further away. And I throw that to you, and the garage location that we've been talking about is where the downtown Guadalajara and Lucky 7 buildings are, for those that have been paying attention. So Rick, can you take it from there? Where are we on the garage? You're breaking ground next week?
It's actually two parcels of property. One, it's the parcel that has the Lucky 7 Guadalajara restaurant that was purchased by the city about 3 years ago. The second parcel is located on the west side of 8th Street, and that's what we call the 7th Street parking lot, located at the base of the S&P building. That piece of property was owned jointly by the county and the city. As part of the agreement between the county and the city that retained the courts downtown, the county agreed to sell their half of the lot to the city, so that then that piece of property and the Lucky 7 Guadalajara parcel could be assembled to make one parcel available for redevelopment of a parking garage. We don't, I believe, need any further council action on this. We have a capital project that was approved and funded, and we have a team assembled of city staff who is keeping the county informed of our progress under the MOU. And we are preparing a RFQ, a request for qualifications, and it will be followed by an RFP, a request for proposals. This two-step process will first hopefully find us some teams of architects and general contractors, GCs, who will form a team to be able to deliver a proposal for a parking garage located on this assembled property. So the RFQ is to find some qualified teams, and the RFP is to take hopefully 2 to 5 of these teams and have them create proposals for the design of some kind of parking garage. We're looking at probably, based on the current zoning for that area, a garage of about 300 parking spaces with about 10,000 square feet of street front retail, so that we continue to activate East Market Street and it doesn't just become this blank wall with a bunch of cars parked behind it. This team is currently working on that. I don't have a date when the RFQ will be out or the RFP will be out, but I can tell you we are working hard to get that done. There are requirements in the MOU for a date certain to break ground and a date certain to deliver the completed garage, because 100 of the spaces within that garage are going to be actually for the exclusive use of the county. So that's about where we are on the project. We have the funding for this fiscal year under that CIP. The following years will need additional council approval in the standard CIP process, but the full funding is at least planned in the out years. It'll be about a $10 million project. If that answers kind of where we are, the next question is reuse of the facility. I've been in the parking industry for about 25 years now. I'm a member of the International Parking and Mobility Institute, and it is the largest industry organization in the United States. The reuse of facilities and the building of facilities with the plan to reuse for other purposes has been a hugely hot topic for the past 5 years. And I can say that the consensus within the industry is it is cheaper to build something with a single functional purpose, tear it down and rebuild it for whatever the new functional purpose is, than to try to build a building that can be adapted for a purpose that you're not certain of when you're building it in the first place. In addition, here in Charlottesville, we have another kind of perspective on this, and that's that right across the street from this planned garage is the current East Market Street garage. That garage was built in the 1970s. It does not have a whole lot of useful life yet left. It is certainly structurally sound. We put a lot of money into it for structural repairs about 5 years ago now. It can certainly continue to be used for another 15, but it does have a certain shelf life. It would seem that retaining the new garage and tearing down the Market Street garage, current Market Street garage, if there was a significant change in parking demand, would make a lot more sense. And then you could use that piece of property right on the mall for whatever the most appropriate purpose was, whatever the highest and best use was at the time you made that decision. That's kind of where I come down on that issue.
And Rick, can you speak a little bit about the meter program and where that went and how that went? It's been a bit of time now, but it was an experiment and a test. And what did you learn from that test?
I was hired in December of 3 years ago, specifically to head a brand new parking division within city government. And my first task was to go out and procure on-street parking meters for a test area recommended by a consultant study surrounding the downtown mall. It's 100 spaces. That's a fairly long process. We hit it pretty hard and fast, and we were ready to go by the following November. And of course, anything that took that long to plan and arrange has a certain amount of steam behind it by the time you're 90 days out. Well, unfortunately, our timing coincided with the Unite the Right rally and everything that followed it. So there was a strong economic downturn on the mall immediately following those riots. And at the same time, we were starting the meter program that we had been planning for months and months. That was a mistake. We should have not started the meter program and waited for economic situation to change. We did not. And so the economic downturn is the result of the Unite the Right rally and the advent of the meters kind of got joined in people's minds, and at least a number of business folks' minds, that the meters were causing this economic downturn as well as the effects of the riot. And there was some strong reaction to that. We paused the program after we only had it running for about 30 days. We were going to restart the program on January 1. We did so. We restarted the meter program on January 1 at 8 o'clock in the morning. There was a city council meeting that started at 6 o'clock that night. The new city council members with the new mayor were installed. The previous council had voted 4-1 in favor of starting the meter program. The new council at about midnight that night voted 5-0 to remove the meters. and we did so. So they lasted one day after the pause for the Thanksgiving and December holidays. So that's kind of where meters are. We have not brought the idea back yet because now we have COVID. So eventually, I hope that the economic conditions will return to more of what everybody considers normal, and we can reconsider the value of charging for parking.
Rick, I sincerely appreciate the background and the candor. It is helpful to identify wins and when we make mistakes, and I think you captured it very clearly. Thank you. The fourth question is to Garland. You touched on this a little bit in your open. Where do you think Charlottesville area transit is going in terms of routes and equipment? Yeah, Sean, I switched up questions on you, sorry. In terms of routes and equipment, some have called for smaller buses running more often. I've had discussions with Brad and others about the manner in which buses are actually paid for and what kind of buses you have to get to do that. Can you explain some of the challenges with the equipment acquisition, as well as you're talking about the north-south and the bilateral? How do you see Charlottesville area transit changing?
So I thought about this a while, and I think the biggest thing I see with Charlottesville area transit is being more reliable, right? So that's the piece that everyone needs to be able to depend on, knowing that when our buses run, they're going to be there and they're going to be there on time. So that's my number one goal. And part of the challenge now is the state has changed their funding model. The funding model is so all know, Charlottesville area transit, like others in the state, get classified in one of three categories: a small urban, a medium, or a large urban transit. We are classified as a small urban transit, which means we receive 5307 operating dollars because we run fixed route transit service. That fixed route transit service also has a requirement that we do paratransit service. Brad does the paratransit service for CAT as a part of JAUNT. That's what part of the function of JAUNT. So when we looked at how we are operating, we are going to get more money from the state to actually run more service if we have higher ridership. Smaller buses do not equate to that model. Having them run smaller, having smaller vehicles running faster still doesn't get us the high capacity we need to get the ridership up. So the bigger the vehicles that we can provide with the faster service is a way and a recipe for us to potentially get more funding, which means we can provide more service. So how do we get to where we want to be is looking at the functionality of each one of our routes, which I actually have hired a consultant. We're starting that process now. We've had a consultant on board for about almost 2 months now. And we're looking at the running times for all of our routes. We're looking at how, and the census tracts and where people are, whether they have single occupancy vehicles. All those sorts of things need to go into the design of routes and how we use them. So that is also dependent on whether we have the proper fleet. Our fleet size is, in my humble estimation, too small to provide the level of service that we need to get get our frequencies up. We have a number of routes that have 60-minute headways. That is not a recipe for building a ridership. You're having to depend on a bus coming once every hour. If you miss it, you could have missed it just 2 minutes. You got 58 minutes to wait for another bus. You're upset with the operator, and you're upset with the way that the system is designed. So my goal eventually is, and this gets to the routing, is once we get the routing correct, I would love to work with both jurisdictions, the city of Richmond, the city of Charlottesville and Albemarle County, to implement what I think of as a 10-20-30 model, where we have high frequency routes to run on every 10 minutes, our medium routes every 20 minutes, and then our lower capacity routes that that are not designed to gain high ridership every 30 minutes. That at least gives you 2 buses every hour, and if we have them bi-directional, it actually allows you more opportunities to catch and use our service. So it's a dependability aspect. I'm also looking at trying to transition us from dependency on just diesel vehicles to a complement where we have a small portion, maybe a third, and a third, where we have diesel, potentially CNG, and then electric vehicles. The electric vehicle model is developing. It's not there on the big bucks side yet. I think 3 to 5 years will be there, but we still need to continue to buy vehicles and get newer. Our fleet is fairly old. We have some hybrid vehicles that are diesel and electric that are not very reliable. So we need to be very careful on the product that we buy so we can actually deliver the reliability that everybody wants us to have and the region should have. So over time, I think the goal would be to have CAT and JAUNT work in complement of each other, where Brad is designed to go into the neighborhoods with smaller vehicles and get them to collection points, transfer points, and get and have CAT running on the major corridors, fairly frequent service, where we'll be able to facilitate people moving them back and forth. That 1-2 punch, I think, is a recipe for providing the region with very good, robust transit service that's designed to get our ridership up and the funding up so we can expand both CAT and JAUNT.
Great, and it's I think that's I date back. I have to do things somewhat graphically, but that the hub and spoke idea works. Yes. For understanding that the CAT would carry the hub, and then perhaps JAUNT would be dealing with the spokes to that portion. I'm interested that we have a consultant on the team ready to move forward. I think that one of our panelists, Sean, would be an excellent consultant on transit from a user's point of view. Sean, in your year of transit travel, what did you find to be the greatest challenge about utilizing public transit? Was it tweeting when you missed the bus, or were the buses full when you were traveling? And what do you think from a user side could be done to increase the ridership that Garland mentioned?
Yes, I think that one of the most important things is, I should say, I'm an atypical person. I'm single, don't have kids. I'm in a situation where I don't have a lot of the constraints that a lot of people had. So I had the gift of flexibility and time. And also my employer had sort of challenged me to do this. If I could just go back for a quick second, I actually bought my house in 2013 because it was on a bus line. So I'm actually sometimes skeptical of the changes that happen over time. If you make an abrupt change, it breaks habits. And I was so mad at the bus system for a long time because of that. And it was really my own inability to challenge myself. And I think that in some cases, I think that, let's go back to that parking garage. We have a lot of advocates who are pushing for a car-free Charlottesville. But I think that what they don't realize is that most of us need to drive. The challenges, I think, it depended on when I went. I think I rode most of this. I would challenge myself to take different routes to see if I could accomplish basic tasks. And I was able to get to Stonefield from my house in about 40 minutes, which was kind of long, a little too long. But obviously, like, again, I would prefer not to drive if I don't have to, if the system works. the Route 7 that travels up and down the spine of US 29 to downtown through the university was mostly full at all hours of the day. If not full, it's certainly the most heavily traveled route because it goes to roughly along where people need it to go. I think that I took the Route 11 once, which goes a different way. And I think that's kind of to the importance of some of the land use decisions we make. Routing the buses from where we have the people makes a lot of sense. And as we consider future housing choices, such as 336 apartments at the northern end of the John Warner Parkway, I think it's important to think in terms of what are some of the changes that could be made to incentivize passengers, people getting out of their cars. And in some cases, there was a recent, one thing I did suggest and people to consider is pricing parking spaces for apartment complexes separate from the, to give people an option. If you agree not to have a car, do you pay for that parking space? But also too, making sure that the system has a bus stop, no matter who runs it. I think that one thing that has been left out of the equation so far is the university system, which is a really interesting comparative example because it has high ridership in part because of the high cost of parking at the University of Virginia. In a closed system, they can change that. But I would say that, I do think it's important to remember that transit is not a luxury for a lot of people who rely on it to get around. The workers at the University of Virginia, either by taking CAT or by taking the shuttle buses that get you around the university. I think that the challenges for me now is that I just don't have anywhere to go. I think at this point, and I think thinking ahead, I think that there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen in people who have jobs like mine. Well, currently, actually, that's not true. I actually am working a retail job now in order to help pay the bills. And the reality is there's no way I could take a bus there. And so I'm now in a situation where I don't have that flexibility. It would be much more of a challenge now for me to get to that job, which is, I could do it, but is it worth it when I have a car and I can get there in 5 minutes when time is everything for me right now? So I think that there's a lot of assumptions, I think, but seeing transit as something that needs to serve that I'm what is, to throw another jargon word out there, I'm what would be referred to as a choice writer. At least I think that's what that's called to the two officials who are much better at this. So I'm a choice writer. So, but the question is, who is the system really for? And the system, I think, is for those who don't have a lot of means at this particular moment in time, and it can save money. Like, I just paid off my car bill, but if I would love to not have a car, but again, well, check back in 6 months to see if I still work in that retail job. But anyway, but I would say that the challenge is, I think that the benefits that came with it were great. The ability to see the community. I'm going to post a link in the chat if I could to a couple of articles I wrote. One of which is just, I loved exploring Albemarle County and exploring the urban ring by getting around on the bus. I hate driving in traffic. I think most people, well, I think a lot of people like it, or at least they like to complain about it. But I like being able to just kind of just enjoy my community without being in a car, without having to worry about the parking. But I would say, just to finish up, I think that all of the discussions that have gone on, I think a lot of it is the public needs a way to talk about this stuff and to communicate about it and to remember it. Because many of you might recall, I know Neil does, that 12 years ago, Charlottesville considered a bus rapid transit. And when that topic comes up again, because there will be an elected official in 4 or 5 years who's going to come along and say, we need to do what Richmond did. Well, let's remember, we have all these previous studies. I'm not going to talk about the city's parking situation, except to say, I think that it does matter who we elect to these positions. And I think that those are questions we need. It matters who we hire. I think we have good people who are implementing a lot of these decisions, but I think that things could have been different. I'll stop rambling.
Sean, I learn every time you ramble, so it's a good thing. I want to pose a question to Brad, and this is really a unscripted question. This conversation about the community, we are one community. We did $1 million comp plan on that idea, and there's a regional transit partnership now that is working together, this panel. Can you speak a little bit about the RTP and what it is and what it's trying to do?
Yeah, I think in some cases it is a way to test the concept of a regional transit authority that does exist in the Virginia Code to be constructed if Charlottesville and Albemarle so desire. That could happen tomorrow by votes by both entities. The kind of precursor to forming that, the PDC, the Planning District Commission, did a bit of a little assessment. And what really came out of that was the trust and communication between various entities, not just the elected bodies, but even between CAT and JAUNT. And it really revealed that there was a need to kind of bridge a lot of that before you jumped into something like an authority. And so I think that's what we really look at the RTP to do, is to test out what structure needs to exist to help with that trust, that communication, how decisions are being made, how we collaborate, when ideas come up, how can they get vetted so that they can move on to the decision makers with either the city and or the county. We're still, I think, in its infancy. It's still trying to get its feet under it in the sense of how it kind of tests that out. I think we've got some momentum more recently, especially with Garland coming on board. He's really interjecting into some of these conversations that have really been devoid of CAT's input. I told Garland that I think after the first meeting or second meeting, I was like, the city and the county never heard from CAT about how a bus is bought, the 12 months or to 14, 16 months it takes to build a bus. All that stuff was never even discussed. And so they were just thirsty for that type of information because he was just getting hammered with questions after question after question. And it was because of that lack of communication. So I think that is really added to the base of information that now the RTP is building on. So I think we'll see some more success once we're all able to get back into a room together. I think COVID is definitely kind of stagnating some discussions, because there is something about being in a room when you're having conversations about just vetting ideas, not decision-making, but just really talking it out. It really does take us all being in the same place and not really over some sort of video conferencing.
I appreciate that, Brad, and I will say that it's been interesting to watch how these discussions have continued, and baby steps are moving. It's not necessarily going to end up at that destination in terms of an authority, but it certainly is. These conversations are helpful. If you have a question for one of our panelists, if you put it into the chat, I'll be reading those. But I have a question for Garland. Considering your time in Richmond, how is Richmond structurally different than Charlottesville area transit?
Well, it's night and day. So
I don't know if we have enough time for that, Garland.
Yeah, that's a big question. So let's take it bit by bit. GRTC is similar in structure to JAUNT, is that it's an independent single entity designed for public transportation. It has a board that gets appointed members from the city of Richmond and its other owner, the county of Chesterfield. They each have 50% ownership in the entity. They have 3 members on each one of the board. There's another jurisdiction, Henrico County, who is not an owner, significant amount for a significant amount of service in the county, and they have done one of the biggest expansion of service that they've in 35, 40 years when the BRT project opened up in Richmond. They added night service, weekend service, extended hours, increased their frequencies. They did the whole kit and caboodle with the redesign that happened. But the structure also allowed individuals to see, lawmakers, that GRTC, to get to the next level, needed what eventually happened this year was dedicated funding, which allowed them now to have real conversations about getting to areas to expand service so that employment centers can be taken care of, and the funding not necessarily be all coming from the jurisdictions who are cash strapped. So there's a I guess it's gas tax is actually helping to pay for some of the expansion to the tune of, I think, $31 or $33 million, something along those lines. Half of it has to go toward existing services, half of it is designed to go for new services. So structurally, it's the independent component of it that helps, and because GRTC is considered a medium-sized, almost large urban transit, they do not get operating dollars. They only get capital funding. So the 5307 model that we get operating dollars and I get capital. GRTC doesn't get any operating, they only get capital. They are allowed to convert a portion of their capital money for operating purposes, but that is only through the means of it's a way of their doing it that FTA allows. So I don't want to get too much into the details unless you're really interested in doing so, but structurally it's designed so there's a lot of independence so they can move and do things that they want to do.
All right, from the chat, we have a question from Tammy Will, and I'm going to put it toward Garland, and then others can jump in. And I remember Brad speaking about this when he was on the supervisors, or maybe someone was speaking to him about it. The idea of, we're talking about bikes and e-bikes being a part of the transportation piece. And what about the safety of the riders of those bikes and the roads, as well as, frankly, the transit stops? I occasionally will see a CAT sign and I'll be like, how could anyone stand there? I think Rio Road comes to mind. I think there's a couple there that are somewhat challenging. And you see other localities investing in transit stops, shelters. And I think Tammy's question really is focused on the safety of the biking community as well. But I'm expanding it to include the riders of CAT to how are they safe while they're waiting for the bus?
So safety is a major issue that one of the things when I first accepted this job, I actually came up and rode a number of our routes for anybody who knew where I was. And in riding those routes, you could see that our infrastructure, the bus stops themselves, don't tell a lot of information. A lot of our shelters are old and don't necessarily meet ADA qualifications when we're trying to make sure that individuals who have mobility challenges. So there's a lot that needs to be done, but that is an expensive endeavor, right? So part of the challenge that we'll have is as we get bigger and we make the system better, we will have to start moving some of our focus from just on the operation side to the capital side, to the investments that we need for shelters, for facilities. One of the things, if I can step away from the safety and I'll get right back to it, is when COVID hit, it showed that transit systems need to really invest in their own infrastructure because there wasn't many places that were open when everything shut down. So our individuals who needed to use the restroom didn't have a really place to do it at the end of the line. So they had to really wait until they got back downtown. But then we have routes that don't come downtown. So where were they trying to go to use the restroom? Some fast food places were open, or they allowed us. We had to make calls to try to get places for our folks to be able to use restrooms. So one of the things I'm actually trying to do is I've hired we're going to hire a senior project manager that's going to be focused on our infrastructure and helping, make our facilities right for growth. And that's also looking at potentially working with the county strategically, potentially buying some parcels that would be able to use for, to have, many transfer centers or a satellite area for a park and ride. Those are things that have to be looked about, planned, worked through as we continue to expand our model. So the safety aspect of the biking, CAT has to work arm in arm with the public safety department, public works department, traffic safety, when they're making their adjustments, and we need to have that conversation. That has not happened, but it does need to happen as we move forward, because I do need to make some adjustments to a number of what I would consider grandfathered in old stops that are not in very well lit areas, or in marginal places where I don't want to say they're unsafe, but there are places that we can make them safer and easier, better access for individuals who want to use our system.
That's great. Thank you. Brad, did you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. I'll start off with saying when we hired the Jefferson, the county executive, he stayed at the hotel over there in Stonefield. And he told us that he, I guess at some point when he was staying there, decided to cross 29 to go over towards Whole Foods. And we were like, what? Why would you do that? And I say this because I think it's important that we always know what infrastructure on the transportation network that we're creating for what mode purpose, because there are times where just the modes shouldn't mix because of the focus or the intent of that infrastructure. And this example of 29 is one to where there's no crosswalks there because VDOT doesn't intend for people to cross 29 at that type of intersection. Without a doubt, we preach this to our drivers all the time about looking out for the bicyclist and leading by example to the rest of the community. It is very easily missed. But I think the infrastructure reminds us that there's the potential of that, alignment of those modes at the same time. I'll give another story, and that is I used to live out renting a house on Avon Street Extended in the days when I was consulting and working in downtown Charlottesville. I'd ride a bike back and forth. And I remember the day that my wife almost hit me within inches, there's no bike path there, so of course you're on the edge of the road. And she came real close to my handlebar. I got home. I said, "Wow, you almost hit me." She's like, "I passed you?" she didn't even see me as a bicyclist. Now she's probably going to kill me if she ever hears this. But it's just sometimes that reminder that there's going to be another mode, in that same realm that helps not only transit drivers, but I think any to look out for it. And it's worth the investment. It's just difficult, especially with the older infrastructure that doesn't have the right of way.
Right. Rick, did you?
If I could comment on the discussion that's been going on. A lot of times parking gets involved in discussions about adding dedicated bike lanes, because many times it's at the expense of on-street parking, because these older right-of-ways are just not wide enough to accommodate all the people who might want to use them. And to me, one of the things that's always missing from that discussion is any kind of data. we don't have really any sort of data on what the mode shares are in the city of Charlottesville today, or in Albemarle County today. And when we talk about changing things to improve them, when we don't have some kind of baseline data, it's very difficult, I think, for us to prove that we changed or improved something without collecting that data routinely. So that's one of the other things I advocate for, is if we could ever come up with annual mode share data so that we can see what changes to transit routes, what additions of bike lanes actually do to the mode share.
Well, as one who did test the bicycleability from my office at the CAAR building on Hillsdale, this is prior to the construction of the John Warner Parkway, I will tell you that 250 is not bike friendly. Sean tried to hit me when he was driving his car. No, that didn't happen. My wife's never tried to hit me, Brad. I will have to tell Christy about that story. The bottom line, I have a question for you, Rick, with regard to parking downtown. There's a lot of new development coming with the CAAR building and others. There's an ongoing discussion of, is there enough parking downtown for this? And perhaps to Sean's point, as that parking tightens, will transit become a more appealing option? But would you speak a little bit about whether there's enough parking downtown today?
Before COVID, this would have been a fairly easy discussion. We had a lot of utilization data for the Market Street and Water Street garage that showed that, for instance, we had to close the Market Street garage on the average of once a week for over an hour in the middle of the day because there weren't any more spaces. And so we had to turn people away and said, maybe go try over at the Water Street garage. We also had events sometimes in the middle of the week at the Paramount that would result in the Market Street and Water Street garage being full simultaneously. Plus, we're looking at the loss of maybe 50 spaces when the 9th Street Bridge project begins. There's a lot of free parking going on underneath it that's going to evaporate during construction. And at least 50 of the spaces are not going to come back after construction is finished. We have the Code building going in with considerable additional demand on the horizon. If we were ever able to redevelop the West 2nd Street parking lot where Keith Woodard originally had a project that fell apart, if that were ever to be redeveloped, that'd be the loss of another 100 spaces that before COVID was 90% full, Monday through Saturday, all day long, and into the evenings. So I think we had a full capacity of the system going on before COVID. Now, the garages are less than half full. And I think that's a huge question as to what the other side of COVID is going to look like. For instance, is the S&P, the business itself, going to continue to encourage telework by its employees, or are they all going to come back to the big black building? So that's just one example of a lot of businesses that we really don't know how they're going to operate on the other side of this. And I think that's going to have a huge change in demand. I know in larger cities, you hear in the parking business a lot about reductions in the utilization of transit currently. That people are back to driving their cars because they don't want to be in buses with other people. Now, is that going to change as soon as COVID is over? A lot of it has to do with supply and demand and pricing as a way to manage demand.
I think that's well put. I have my own barometer. My daughter is studying for her doctorate down at UNC, and she has been riding the bus, loving Chapel Hill Transit religiously. And after COVID, first they, of course, she's getting into chemistry, so she has to be in the lab. But now there's parking available, and her bosses don't want her on transit because of the potential of contamination. And so literally she's driving that distance instead of riding the bus, which she loved to ride. It's an interesting dynamic, and I do think post-COVID, which I do think we're going to get to a post-COVID, we will see transportation modeling change. One of the greatest increases in roadway capacity was when the federal government went to flex time, and all of a sudden you could arrive at a different time. Rush hour became much longer, but you had differing times of arrival, which allowed the existing infrastructure to have more capacity. I think we may see a bit of that post-COVID with folks doing 2 days in the office and 3 days out, but the future will tell. I have one last question for Mr. Tubbs. When you are a world traveling friend of mine, and you've traveled a lot of places. Brad has talked about his time going to conferences that are far flung so that he could ride buses in weird countries. Other countries. But could you speak a little bit about how sociologically the mentality is different in the U.S. versus some of the other countries you visited?
I think I think that driving rates were not as, I'm speaking purely anecdotally. Most of my connection is in Britain. When I was younger, nobody had a car. As economic fortunes rose there, that changed. And I think that, so I think it's just as congested. I think people still, I think that sometimes I remember even just joking with people like when I go to England, I take the bus. Like I can tell you exactly when the number 62 is going to be driving past this one spot, because there it does run on a timetable. It's at 5 minutes to the hour, and then it gets me to Dunstable through. Anyway, doesn't matter. I think but even there, it's sort of looked at as, you're doing what now? So I think it is, I think that driving is seen, I think sociologically, as the thing that we do. And I think that to the extent that we can change that over time, the better. I do want to talk a little bit about the last trip I took to England, because it was really awesome. I was able to get from my front door almost to my first destination without getting into a private vehicle. And that's because of the expansions that have been made to get to Metro. It's changed now. Some of you might not know that there's now a daily bus service that goes between Danville and Dulles. So you can take the bus to get to Dulles if you were to want to, save on your parking costs. Those are things that are happening, I think. But I think that the more we can publicize that, the better. And I think that when I was doing those stories, I was trying to get people to think, well, could I do this? Could I change this? And then what would it take for me to change that and make that better? And that's kind of the role I still see myself playing. And to that end, I'm really excited about that bus, because I would really love to travel to Danville. I've never been to Danville. I've never hung out in Danville. I'm desperate for some place to go for vacation. And now, so my next trip that I'm planning is going to be a trip on the Virginia Breeze bus that goes down to Danville. I want to be in the urban area. So that's something I want to do. We haven't talked about trains, for instance. You know, I think that's another thing to think about. Pre-COVID this year, there was, I don't even know what the status of it is, but there was a massive investment from the state in rail. And of course, here we have seen the enormous benefits that come from a daily train that comes through here. I think that continuing to challenge things, and I mean, there's a lot of people who don't want to drive, or if they're going to own a car, I don't think I'll ever buy another new car or a used car ever again. I am hoping that there will be some sort of car sharing mechanisms, because it's just an expense I don't want to have. I think that's going to continue to be the case. But of course, everything's uncertain. And I think the times we're in really should make us think question a lot of the assumptions we have had about the future. I don't know what that means for a lot of, say, parking garages or for fleets, but it's going to be an interesting few years. I rambled again. Did you learn anything?
I did. And now I know how to get from that one pub to the other pub you wanted to get to in England.
Neil, if I could add real quick, one, to clarify, the legislation Sean's talking about is Virginia has created a passenger rail authority that's being funded, which means now there is a focal point for those investments to enhance that passenger rail connections and infrastructure. So it's a pretty significant move for the state to have that very focused authority. I will say, in those ventures out in outside of the U.S., talking to peers, one of the very different cultural things that they look at that really has helped them with COVID is Europe really focuses on safety when it looks at its transportation, especially with public transport. And that's what they're expected to do, is to have a very safe system. And so for us, we haven't always looked at safety as a factor for public transit. It's more recent that we're held to those accountabilities. But I just wanted to share that because when you board on public transit in Europe, the culture there is that it's the safest mode of transportation as opposed to driving yourself in other modes.
Well, I want to, one of the things about a Zoom meeting is you don't get to have the round of applause, but I want to thank our four panelists and be respectful of everyone's time. I have learned a great deal, and I really do want to thank you all for the generosity of your time, and also thank you for listening, because I think a lot was gained here. And if you have further questions, feel free to contact me, Neil at freeenterpriseforum.org. And I'm happy to put you in touch with these gentlemen. Sean, I think you're going to get a note from John Updike, who is Mr. Danville, because he is the one that will tell you where those can't miss spots.
Well, I will say this, a casino is going to replace Dan River Mills. Well, but up the north side of town. And the other place is Midtown Market. It's got the best chicken salad and steaks that you can get.
Can't wait.
Well, with that being said, I want to thank you all for being a part of the CAAR Property Rights Luncheon, and be safe and stay dry.
Thanks, everybody.